you very much, Olores, for this invitation to present this work. I am an environmental engineer, and this presentation, it's about a work that I developed in my master's dissertation. So I really like this topic of odor impact and odor control. I've been working with it for more than 10 years now. And since in Brazil, it's not a very well-known topic, I really decided I need to study more about it and somehow try to bring some knowledge to share and somehow help to develop this topic in Brazil. So that's why the title is Proposition of Odor Impact Criteria and Strategy for Brazil. These are the topics that we're going to cover in this short presentation. Well, most of you already know that odor, it's not a regular air quality pollutant. It's more complex because it's normally caused by a mixture of substances that bring a synergic effect, different from the effect if we were working with isolated compounds. And this mixture, it causes nuisance and brings complaints to industries and to environmental agencies. And there's also the subjectivity and individual variability of different people. Some are more sensible, others less sensible. But even though all this complexity, there are quantitative assessment methods, and many previous speakers talked about this. And even though in Brazil they're not very well known, there are methods to measure and to quantify the odor. And also the impact of odor, it's normally a combination of the FIDUS factors. I'm going to show them in a few slides for you. And those factors can be measured, quantified, and regulated. Well, in Brazil, we don't still have a legislation about this topic. There are a few mentions, but very subjective and no quantitative criteria. So what we are trying to propose, it's a robust legislation, and that in the same way that Chile is doing, and we heard Daniela present a few minutes ago, we need legislation in order to advance. So the objective of this work is to suggest quantitative criteria for odor impact assessment, considering the Brazilian reality, as well as assessment protocols, which form the strategy for odor assessment in Brazil. So it's I highlighted the Brazilian reality because, as I said, we have some limitations. We don't have much knowledge, and also our resources are limited. But we need to start somewhere, and so this work is an attempt to do a starting point from which we can advance in the future. Well, the FIDUS factors that I mentioned before are very well known. Frequency of odor exposition, intensity, which is odor concentration, duration of each odor episode, offensiveness, and also sensitivity, which is related to land use and also individuals. So all these factors, they interact and they overlap, and the odor impact is a result of the interaction of all those factors, and we can measure them. And so the criteria, they need to be related to those factors, at least most of them. It would be the ideal that we can bring them all together in a legislation. If not all of them, at least most of them. So we went to study how other countries deal with this topic, and we chose two very, very good articles from Brancher and from Bocoa. They researched many countries, and the countries are highlighted here in the map. Since we are starting in Brazil, we need to look at the experience of other countries and learn from them. And that's what we did. Here in South America, we don't have many examples, only Chile and in Bolivia, but other countries are very more advanced. And what we found was that there are five main regulatory approaches. The one that is most used for most of the 28 countries that studied is the maximum impact standard, which uses odor as the substance, and it's adopted in 24 of the 28 countries. And how is this standard developed? It uses an odor concentration, a percentile, and a peak to mean factor. And in order to measure and assess this standard, it's needed to do sources sampling using dynamic dilution factometry and also atmospheric dispersion modeling. With these methods, it's possible to check whether you are above or below those thresholds of odor concentrations, and also to calculate the percentiles, which responds to frequency, and peak to mean factor, which responds to the duration factor. Other approaches include the minimum separations distance, maximum emission standards, and maximum nuisance standards, and also control technology standards. All of them are very interesting. So in this proposition, we tried to include more than one approach. Well, so starting with the assessment criteria, we found that in the USA, there are 16 jurisdictions that adopt a field of factometry as an assessment method. And they use the criteria of 7 DT. DT is dilution to threshold. It's similar to odor units. And so we are suggesting for Brazil the adoption of this criteria: desirable level below 7 DT and level of potential nuisance above 7 DT. And there is also the how can you verify this complaint? And there's a need for an assessment, at least 2 assessments with interval of 15 minutes between them, and it must be done by trained inspectors. So in this way, you can validate whether a complaint it's real or not. Also for modeling, we suggested these criteria. It's different for residential and commercial areas. The target is below 8 odor concentration, below 8 odor units. And for agricultural, industrial, and other unspecified areas, below 10. For frequency, our suggestion is the 98th percentile and average time of 3 minutes. And how it should be evaluated, it's described here. So this criteria should be evaluated at the nearest receptor, nearest sensitive receptor. That could be the nearest residence or neighbor. Also, dispersion modeling needs to take into account at least 3 years of hourly data, and also there are suggestions on how to determine the emission rate, which is the input data needed for the modeling. Other approaches, I talked about a maximum impact standard, and we also suggested also the control technology standard. Like Daniela from Chile, she said it's very important that we suggest the use of best operational practices to prevent and minimize odor emissions. So it's not enough only to measure odor and measure impact. We want to prevent that. So that's why we need to have a criteria connected to the control technology. So for new sources, what we suggest is the operational plan. And for existing sources, periodic reports giving evidence of those best practices. And for new new industries or new sources, we suggest the requirement to use best available technique, because in this way you can reduce odor emissions. And also, we know that there are fugitive sources, and in those sources it's difficult to have some kind of control. So we suggest a minimum separation distance standard of 500 meters between the fugitive sources and existing or planned residential areas. There are some more details I will show further. And also, we proposed some assessment protocols, because like Daniela said, people, they don't really know how to deal with the situation. So we try to suggest a flow charts and a step-by-step orientation for the stakeholders. So there are 4 of them. I will give more detail on this first one, and the following ones are a little bit similar. So starting with a new odor emission plant, imagine a paper plant or wastewater treatment plant. When the environmental agency will receive the documents for doing licensing, this is the steps that they need to follow. So start with the size. It needs to be larger than small. So small sources are not regulated at this point, because we need to start with, you know, the bigger ones, the ones that give more problems. So the first standard is the control technology standards, and the first requirement is to check whether they have the good practice and best available techniques applied. If not, then the license cannot be granted, and the industry needs to develop and to present those to the environmental agency. The next step is to identify all the odor sources, like do an odor inventory, and separate them by type. So pointer area sources and fugitive odor sources, they have different ways to be measured. And so for the pointing area sources, the suggestion is to apply atmospheric dispersion study using emission data from similar sources, and check those criteria in the table 3 and see if they are met. If yes, then the license can be granted. If not, then there is potential substantial impact, and the projects should be improved before receiving the license. And so you can go back to the step of atmospheric dispersion study until you can meet the criteria, and then the license can be granted. And for fugitive odor sources, you check the minimum distance of 500 meters, and if that is okay, you can receive the license. And that doesn't end once the company receives the license. They need to continue doing monitoring and also using good operational practices, and do adequate maintenance for their control systems. So those, the initial part and the final part is similar for all of the flow charts. What changes is that for new or for renewal of license renewal with emission sources, you can do a little bit more steps of measuring and checking, doing measurements on the sources and also in the field. But the idea is the same. Starts always with prevention, good practices, and then continues checking that throughout the license period. And this another flow chart for in the case where you have odor complaints, then you can also do some more checking, some more monitoring in the field, and with field of optometry. And the final flow chart is for complaint validation, which we know it's a problem for environmental agencies. They receive the complaints and they don't know what to do with them. So this is a suggestion on how to deal with it. So in conclusion, the establishment of clear and effective odor regulation in Brazil, we understand it is feasible as long as we put some well-defined criteria and also a standardized protocol. And so what we are suggesting for Brazil is the same as most of the countries studied use. So a criteria for field olfactometry and for atmospheric dispersion modeling. And also the preventive approach, minimum separation distance of 500 meters, and also best operational practices and best available technologies for control for new sources. And so we hope that these well-defined criteria and methods can help prevent and solve conflicts and contribute to a harmonious coexistence. We have some recommendations here. I think I'm above my time, but in summary, we need to develop more. We need to do a periodic review of these protocols and make it increase the protection level with time. Also develop good practice guides and a technical handbook of environmental odor assessment, and also more information on odor treatment and technologies. These are the references, and so thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Débora, for your presentation. And now let's take the chat from some questions. The first one is, in your opinion, Débora, what are the main challenges in creating odor regulations in Brazil?
Well, I believe the main challenge, there are many, but I believe the main is that people involved that have the power to put legislations in place, they don't have the knowledge, they don't understand. They think odor is very complex, and there's no solution. You can't control. You can't solve this problem. So it's better not to try to write a legislation about it. We don't. Unfortunately, I believe it's a little bit of lack of knowledge and also lack of will. Mm-hmm. This is not important. We don't do a lot of effort on this topic, I believe.
Okay, there is another question here. Could you please give more detail about the choice of 8 odor units as a limit compared to other jurisdictions that adopt 1 odor unit?
Okay. Probably I didn't see who asked this question, but yes, probably someone from a country where the legislation is already in place. So as I said in the beginning, we need to start somewhere. In Brazil, we don't have any legislation, we don't have any criteria. So if we start with 1 odor unit, that would be very or almost impossible for industries to achieve. So we are starting from the point when our idea is that we can start with acceptable odor level, and start with that and work with companies and communities to achieve that. And then a few years in the future, we can review this and make it more stringent. It's like the other pollutants, MP or PM for health. When the World Health Organization started with suggestions and guidelines, they didn't start with the most the lowest. They started with a higher level, and then with time you will reduce it. So that's our main reason for starting with 8. Also because 8 odor units correlates well to the 7 DT, 7 dilution to threshold, which is the unit for field olfactometry.
Okay, thank you, Débora, for everything. Let's move on.
Okay, thank you very much.